For decades, Sean Combs, Puffy, Diddy, Love, was so much more than just a musician. He was a cultural architect. I mean, he built an entire empire that really defined an era. But a series of shocking allegations and a huge federal trial have pretty much shattered that image. It's forcing all of us to take a hard look at one of the most powerful figures in modern entertainment. And wow, this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? The contrast is so stark. On one side, you have the icon, a 3-time Grammy winner, a billionaire entrepreneur, a guy with a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And on the other side, well, that's the reality now. A federal inmate, a convicted procurer, whose entire legacy is just hanging by a thread. So how did it possibly come to this? To really get the magnitude of this fall, we have to start at the beginning. We have to understand the incredible, incredible heights he reached. His story is basically a masterclass in pure ambition and how to build an empire from scratch. The 1990s. For Sean Combs, that decade was just a whirlwind. His rise was unbelievable, almost like something out of a movie. I mean, in 1990, he's an intern. Just 3 years later, after getting fired from that very same company, by the way, he founds his own legendary label, Bad Boy Records. Then he goes and signs one of the greatest rappers of all time, the Notorious B.I.G., and by the end of the decade, he's not just a music superstar, he's a full-blown fashion mogul. And the success was just unimaginable. 7 million copies of his debut album sold in the US alone. Then, after the absolute tragedy of losing his friend and star artist Biggie Smalls, he releases the tribute song I'll Be Missing You. And it didn't just top the charts, it made history. It was the very first hip-hop song to ever debut at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But here's the thing. Combs was never just a musician. He was a brand. He brilliantly expanded into fashion with Sean John. He turned Ciroc into a household name in vodka. He launched the Revolt TV network. This wasn't just a career. It was a sprawling empire. And in building it, he basically wrote a new blueprint for the artist as a diversified CEO. So let's flip the coin, because even at the absolute peak of his success, a really troubling pattern of controversy and legal trouble was starting to form, casting this long, dark shadow over everything he was accomplishing. So were all these recent events just a total shock out of nowhere? Well, if you look closely at his history, the warning signs, they were there for decades, running right alongside his rise to the top. The cracks in that perfect public image really started to show back in 1999. First, he was charged with assaulting a record executive, Steve Stout, supposedly over a scene in a music video. Now, he ended up pleading guilty to a lesser charge of harassment, but still, it was a pretty big mark on his record. But that same year brought an even bigger scandal. Combs and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, were arrested after a shooting inside a Times Square nightclub. It turned into this massive, highly publicized trial. And yeah, while Combs was ultimately acquitted on all the charges, the whole incident just cemented this reputation for being close to violence and chaos. And all of that, well, it brings us to the series of events that would finally lead to his conviction and the complete crumbling of the empire he spent a lifetime building. Everything started to unravel in public in November 2023. That's when his former partner, Cassie Ventura, filed an absolute bombshell of a lawsuit. It was settled just 1 day later, incredibly fast, but the damage was already done. It just opened the floodgates for more allegations, and that kicked off a full-blown federal investigation. The raids on his homes we all saw on the news, and then finally a federal indictment. So after that long trial, the jury came back with this, a split verdict. And this is what's really fascinating. He was found not guilty of the most severe charges, things like racketeering and sex trafficking by force. But, and this is the key, the jury found him guilty on 2 counts of transportation for prostitution. And that federal crime, that's what sealed his fate. With that verdict in, the fallout was immediate, and it was severe. The consequences weren't just legal. They struck right at the heart of the cultural legacy he had so carefully built for himself. 50 months. That was the sentence. A little over 4 years in federal prison. But that number represents so much more than just jail time. It was the definitive public end to the era of Sean Combs as this untouchable mogul. The cultural institutions that once celebrated him began to completely distance themselves. In a really powerful symbolic move, his own alma mater, Howard University, revoked his honorary doctorate, they returned his $1 million donation, and they cut all ties.
The message was crystal clear. His name was now toxic.
And so, that leaves us with this final, incredibly complicated question. He revolutionized music, fashion, and business. He created opportunities and defined a generation. But he was also convicted of federal crimes rooted in exploitation. Can both of those things be true? How will history ultimately weigh the icon against the convict? That, right there, is the question that will define his legacy.